Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're as delighted to be here as I am. And it's been a long journey to come here today. London is far away, but coming home is always beautiful. And it feels like that for me. I was here in the years 1972 to 1976, and I know looking around you all remember those years. It's not an imposition. But in my first week here, a highly impertinent man sitting right there, called John Sutton Smith, pointed at me in a Bible study group and said these words. You remember them well, John. He said, "Boy," which I thought, well, there you go. He got that bit right. And he goes, "Boy, the devil lives in your duvet." Do you remember that, John? John was the head of English. And what he wanted to say to me and to my brother Daniel and to everybody else who was in that room at that time is your life depends on how you use your time, what you do with it, and whether or not you bring value from the seconds and moments you've got or you waste them. This morning, I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And John, my grandson Tambo over here, he too gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I've taught all the kids and the family to get up at 5 because of you. And that was the first week here at Scarisbrick Hall, 1972. And I learnt the value of 5 o'clock rising because all of a sudden you discover, when you've taken that across 6 days of the week, allowing one day to give you a tiny bit longer, but not a lot, but across 6 days of the week, you then have an 8-day week. And that's wonderful. And then people say to me, "How do you do all the things you do?" I say, "It's very easy. I have an 8-day week." Because you realize the time that God has given you where you can make wonderful things happen. I want to begin some remarks with paying tribute to David for enduring 7 years of writing a book. It's a hard thing to write a book. I wrote a book way back in the 1980s, which thankfully is long buried. But I have one copy at home, and there's one in the British Library. And it's called Addiction, and it was about heroin addiction. I wasn't a heroin addict, by the way, don't stop panicking. But I wrote a book because I was working with heroin addicts, and I came to understand the pressures and realities of their lives. But David, for 7 years, you labored to put this text together, which is absolutely full of richness and stories and erudite thinking. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And the Headley family, who are here, who've continued this great tradition of supporting Scarisbrick Hall School, returning it back into Scarisbrick Hall School, investing so much in restoring facilities but building new ones. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you. And I heard Raymond mention Rachel Oxley. Is Rachel here? Is she here? No? Well, I will talk a lot about dear Charles Oxley, who to me was a phenomenal personal mentor and great head teacher. Had a massive appreciation of respect and love for him. I'll tell you what he did for me personally. 2 things. My coming to Scarisbrick Hall School, beginning of September 1972, had followed just a few days earlier, 28th of August 1972, at 2:30 in the afternoon, where my dear older brother, who is also an alumni of the school and was here in the summer last year, had helped me to pray to make a commitment to Jesus Christ in my life. And that decision, 2:30 in the afternoon on the 28th of August 1972, was the pivotal turning decision of my life. And I came here 2 days later and met John. And as I grew into the next level, into being 15 and 16, I would always admire the way Charles Oxley, those of us who were pupils will remember, and you remember, he always used to stand like this, you know? Put his hands here, stood like this. And he had that sort of upright and overwhelming sense that he was almost like an icon. And he was so tall, he's so big. And of course, the older you get, you realize he's actually, well, he was tall, but I remember him saying to me one day when I was 15, unlike John, who was just rude and called me boy, Charles, as a headmaster, said, Michael, I know you want to know more about the Bible. If you'd like help, I'll read it with you. Wasn't that amazing? So every other weekend when Charles Oxley would be here and his wife, Muriel, was elsewhere at Tower College, where I also went in our younger days. Before, as a family, we moved to the Caribbean and then came back. Every other Saturday, I would go to his office after dinner, knock on the door, he'd let me in. I'd sit on the other side of the big table, and we'd read the Bible together for an hour and a half. And for me, as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, that was phenomenal. That was phenomenal. I really deeply, deeply appreciated his time and his effort and his willingness. He did something else for me, which was having left the school, and of course, most kids, when they leave school, want to forget it. I didn't want to forget it. In fact, I think I even told John this. I dreamt many times, I was telling Tambo on the way up here in the car, I dreamt many times about coming back here as a school teacher, thinking that would be my dream. I did end up as a school teacher, true, but because of Charles Oxley, something happened. So I went to theological college, as pointed out in David's book, got a rather rum degree, reflecting my limited number of brain cells. I got a 2-2 in theology. And of course, everyone around me at the time said, well, you're going to be a missionary beggar for the rest of your life, and you'll never... I thought, bring it on. Let's have a fight. But I'd been through college, got my rum degree, was just starting teacher training college, and Charles Oxley sent me a letter. And the letter said, Michael, would you, on my behalf, go to a meeting in London, in Hanover Square, just behind the Oval Tube Station, and will you attend this meeting, take some notes, and send me the notes? Oh, of course. I did, because I had such affectionate support for him, and I understood his mission, and we were living that mission here in the school. So I went along. I was a little bit late, John, by about 5 minutes. The meeting had already started. I was the youngest person there by far, I think by decades, to be perfectly honest. And I looked around the room, and of course everybody else was elderly and of a different skin tone to me. I looked around the room and I thought, oh, well, I think I stand out here somewhat. But I said hello to the chairman of the meeting, who was a man called Hartley Booth. And we said one hello. 6 years later, because of Charles Oxley's request, because of saying hello, 6 years later, he's working for Margaret Thatcher in 10 Downing Street. I didn't know that. And he phones me up. And he says, do you remember me? In fact, I remember him saying, because in those days the telephone was on the wall. You remember that? I know the young people can't relate to that. What, mobiles on the wall? Why did you put them there? But it was on the wall. And I remember taking the phone from the wall, and I was a teacher, and I was preparing lessons and marking books. And he says, is that Michael? And I said, yes, it is. Who's this? He says, Hartley here. So I said, oh, 'cause he's very posh. So I said, oh, Hartley. He goes, Hartley Booth. Do you remember me, Hartley Booth? 6 years ago, we met. You came to the Hanover Square, and 6 years ago, we had a brief conversation. I said, yeah, I think we said hello. He goes, yes. And he said, I'm in Downing Street. I said, oh, I didn't know there was a phone box in Downing Street. And he said, no, I'm inside. I'm with her. She's right here. I went, what, the Prime Minister? Yes, she's right here. I could hear cackling away. I said, oh, how can I help? I'm thinking my marking or my teaching has been really bad. That it's got that far. And he said, well, you remember, there have been very difficult urban riots, 1981, 1985. These have been mainly urban riots, mainly black communities, people unemployed, distressed, feeling a real sense of loss, no prospects, and blaming the government. And we are told by the security intelligence system it's all going to happen again in 1986. And this was February 1986. And he said, can I tell you what happened in the cabinet room? I said, go on. So he said, the Prime Minister gathered all of her cabinet and all of her advisors, and the advisors are standing at the back. And she said, I'm going to use her voice, because I did meet her many times, as I picked up her voice. And she said, does anybody here know anybody black who can help us? We need help. They're going to burn the place down. Anybody have any help? So Hartley said, I know someone. And that was me. And that's all because of Charles Oxley saying, would you go and take some notes? So I ended up working for Margaret Thatcher as a non-conservative, I have to say. If you've researched me at all, but please don't bother, you'll realize that I'm an independent member of the House of Lords, a non-political crossbench, which people say, what is a crossbencher? I say, we're angry with all the rest. So we're neither conservative, Labour, liberal, or whatever. And all that transformation in my life, which started off because I did a simple thing, that because of my affection for Charles Oxley, who was a phenomenal leader for this great school, for what the culture here represented, what John taught me about timekeeping, and Julie, such a gracious, always kind, welcoming, motherly figure, the best mother and grump in the world. Because of what I learnt here, I was able to apply that across generations. So I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful to David for writing his book, which we will talk about shortly. One of the other things that I learnt here, and Tambo will affirm that this is true, is that I learnt to be constantly grateful. Because every morning we could step out by a lake or round some bushes and walk forestry and breathe air. And there used to be, I don't know if there are still, Jeff, swans on the lake. Swans on the lake, and I remember, I did fall into the lake once. Because I wasn't paying attention. It wasn't listening to a phone because we didn't have them. But I was chatting to someone. I literally just walked straight into it. But there we go. It is what it was. But here we had an atmosphere that was rich with opportunity. And we learnt the value. I mean, John and Julie were missionaries in Zambia, and we learnt the value of thinking about the world beyond ourselves, understanding our privilege and putting that privilege into perspective. And every day walking around, thinking, singing sometimes, praying, reflecting, being grateful. I'm very conscious of that gratitude. At the time, being here, and this has become the mantra of my life, my very best friend then, Michael Sargent, who you'll remember, who's a big figure at ITV now, and that's wonderful. But Michael asked me, we were walking one early morning around the bushes, and Michael asked me, what do you want to do with your life? And I was 16 at the time. Now, I know it's not a regular 16-year-old question, but I think it should be. And I had this phrase that popped out, which was, I want to speak up for the poor. And I want to bend the power of the prosperous to the potential of the poor. Speak up for the poor. bend the power of the prosperous to the potential of the poor. I remember Michael asking me, what does that mean? And I said, well, the first bit's clear. I've got to speak on behalf of those who have no voice, who the world disregards or disrespects. I need to speak up for them. And I had lived through a lot of that in our Jamaica years, where I'd witnessed savage street violence because of the breakdown of the culture and the economy. And I'd watched people, thinking of recent context in Southport, I'd watched people violently attack each other. And that was in the early 1970s. And that's the reason why our parents sent my brother and I away, because the place was in meltdown and we were too close to the extreme violence and tension. So we came here. So I knew I needed to speak up for the poor, but then I had to learn, what does it mean to bend the power of the prosperous? And I figured out, that means I need to get to know lots of prosperous people. I need to be in places where there's wealth and resource. So how am I going to do that? Well, that's not up to me. That was up to God. And the trajectory of life has been all about that. So when the Queen was kind enough to offer me a peerage to the House of Lords, by the way, I was offered by the Conservatives. Jeffrey Archer was chairman of the Conservative Party at the time, and he said, we'd like to give you a peerage. I said, no, thank you, Jeffrey, I'm not a Conservative. You can keep it, but you're a great friend. So I said no. And Tony Blair then offered me, and I said no, because I wasn't a Labour member, and I didn't want to, anyway. And then Paddy Ashdown, Liberal, offered me, and I said no. And so I just kind of thought, well, I'll just wait. But who's next? I don't want to be a Green. Never mind, sorry. But although the Greens are very important. What happened was the Blair government had set up the Independent Appointments Commission. And thankfully, they came to me. But when the Queen, when you get offered a peerage, you get sent this very hefty document, and you have to go and see a person called the Garter King of Arms, whose office goes back to the 11th century. And you go to this glamorous building, which is sort of in the city of London. And there is the Garter King of Arms, up some creaky stairs. You get to the top, and he's looking down cut glasses like this, just like John has on here. And he says, which bit of Her Majesty's domain do you wish to possess? Because you have to be of somewhere, because we're not hereditary. And I said, Scarisbrick. He said, why Scarisbrick? He said, there used to be a Lord of Scarisbrick. I said, I know there used to be a Lord, but that was way before. Why Scarisbrick? I said, because I went to a school there that fashioned my heart, framed my soul, trained my mind, and gave me the opportunity to have respect and dignity. So that is why I took on the title of Scarisbrick. Because of here. Because of the investment of David and of the great Charles Oxley, and of the families who cared so deeply about what they nurtured in us as young men and young women. It mattered enormously. My life now, I go to the Palace of Westminster virtually every day, and it looks like that. So I've not quite escaped it. Well, I don't go every day. I probably do about 2 days a week. Most of my life now is consumed with prisoners, and spend a lot of time in prisons up and down the country, mainly in the south. I was in a prison on Wednesday morning, in the Palace of Westminster on Thursday morning. I'll be in the Palace of Westminster on Monday and in a prison on Tuesday next week. That's the way it goes. And I realize that in speaking up for people who often have been misjudged, wrongly judged, I'm speaking up for the poor and standing with them. I can smell the difference between someone who's been wrongly convicted and someone who hasn't. I've been around this for 40 years. Raymond forgot to mention my CBE, but that's okay. But I was given a CBE for my years leading crime concern and leading alternatives to custody. And I continue on this journey of fighting for justice. So Thursday morning we had a a painful debate about the post office scandal compensation scheme. And I raised extensively over a 10-minute speech the fact that there were 986 prosecutions of postmasters, 986 in every corner of England, Scotland and Wales. Do you know not one judge questioned? Not one judge questioned. They just swallowed what the post office told them. And what the Crown Prosecution Service said. No judge threw a single case out. We're having a difficult conversation in Parliament right now about the independence of the judiciary. And I think after this post office scandal, I'm inclined towards more direction. It's not an easy thing. You change great institutions that have stood for a long time. But when you see how deep that miscarriage of justice was on people who, many of whom ended up committing suicide, many went to prison, over 200 went to prison, their lives were lost in the course of deceit. We need to have better values and do things in our institutions that reflect that. So I'm just going to give you, as we come to a quick close, as I do, before we move on to the next part of our conversation, I wanted to read you, because this is a great school, and many of us who are here were at school together, and I've kept this for a very, very long time. Besides the fact that my habit of getting up at 5 in the morning, which is all your fault, John, I have another habit, which is my mother made me always carry a handkerchief. And I used to say to, before I understood, I'd say, Mother, why do I always have a handkerchief? She says, in case you have a runny nose, but if you don't have one, somebody else has one, you give it to them. So that was the important thing I learned. But I also learned, while I was here, to think about what growing up is all about. And I'll just finish with this before I introduce David and Jeff. It's called If I Had My Child to Raise Over Again. So have a think about this, all of you who have had your children. If I had my child to raise all over again, I'd build self-esteem first and the house later. I'd finger paint more and I'd point the finger less. I'd do less correcting and more connecting. I'd take my eyes off my watch and watch with my eyes. I'd care to know less and know to care more. I'd take more hikes and fly more kites. I'd stop playing serious and seriously play. I'd run through more fields and gaze at more stars. I'd do more hugging and less tugging. I'd see the oak tree in the acorn more often. I'd be firm less often and affirm more often. I'd model less about the love of power and more about the power of love. Thank you, Scarisbrick.